Rich people of Reddit who married someone significantly poorer. What surprised you about their previous way of life? Making financial decisions based around the 3-paycheck month. If you're paid every 2 weeks, most months you get 2 paychecks, and all of your monthly bills and budgeting is based on those 2 paychecks. But twice a year there are 3 paydays in a month, and that's when you can actually solve problems. That's when you can get the car registered, or fix the dryer, or get the cat spayed. The other 10 months you're doing maintenance and trying to scrape by. 3 paycheck months you can actually try to fix problems. I know this so well. Finally in a salaried position but on a tipped income, those 3 paycheck months were a serious lifesaver. More of a funny incident, but I was the poor one. My husband, at the time still boyfriend, took me out to a very nice restaurant. Waiter asked if I want pepper on my Caesar salad that was just made tableside. I said sure and he goes about it. Thing is, I didn't know you had to say stop. My husband slowly realizes this, but decides to see it play out. He did eventually say that I need to say stop. I just thought a Caesar had this way as it was my first time even eating a salad that wasn't just iceberg and ranch dressing. It still tasted fine, just a little bit too much pepper, haha. I did this exact same thing but it was an Olive Garden and Parmesan cheese. Sadly, one of the people I was with stepped in and was basically like, dude, you have to tell him to stop. Face with tears of joy. Face with tears of joy. Face with tears of joy. Parmesan cheese, dude, you have to tell him to stop. I know, keep staring at server. I only tell them to stop because I start to feel guilty about how much cheese I want. Face with tears of joy. When the family had people over for dinner, if they ended the prayer before the meal with FHB, Amen, it was a signal to let the children know that they don't have enough food for everyone, so take smaller servings and let the guests get a regular serving. FHB equals family, hold back. They were always generous to their friends and didn't let their lack of funds embarrass themselves when doing so. I grew up poor too. But we never had any guests round for dinner. FHB, my heart, loudly crying face. Was just thinking the same thing. My family was considered anti-social. It wasn't because we didn't like socializing or going to events, it's because we couldn't afford to, and if mom and dad organized dinners they planned months beforehand, scraped every cent together to pay for it. My ex was stunned when I told her I've only ever had one birthday party, 21st, because mom and dad had no money. I cannot think of one single thing that can explain to not poor people how poor people operate. Well, some of us better than this exact scenario. I will give you everything when I have nothing, I always will. It's probably why I'll always be poor. Poor people consistently give far higher percentages of their income to charitable causes, typically not so much that it is a major contributor for most of those people to why they're poor, but it is a significant correlation and fascinating from a sociological perspective. The store I work at was doing a fundraiser for a local kids' hospital. A man came in to buy cleaning supplies because his house had burned down that morning. But when he heard about the fundraiser, he dug through his wallet to donate $2 in change. I'll never forget that man. I definitely cried in the break room after he left. Madness hit me. I didn't realize how shitty that was. I thought that was how normal people lived their lives. I remember taking the smallest servings of whatever we were having anytime we had friends over. We had enough for our family but not much else. Anytime someone came over you had to stretch it and eat a snack late in the night if you could, peanut butter, an apple, maybe oatmeal. I also remember the day I realized my father let us kids grab our food first, so if I grabbed the big piece of chicken then he would go hungry because he'd only get the little piece. I remember being so affected by that realization. He would sacrifice his meal for his kids. He would sacrifice his meal for his kids. This is always a hard one. He would do it for you in a heartbeat, but in retrospect you probably want to thank him, but he would probably be ashamed to admit that was ever the reality. I've been hungry at times and know the feeling, and the food dreams, all too well. As a father, that's one prayer that I will carry my whole life. Please never let my kids know hunger. As a poor person, I've experienced this many times. My mom would slap us if we tried to get more than our share before the guests had enough. Honestly, food insecurity. When we were first married, she would get visibly uneasy if the food in the house was running low. She never overate or anything, she was just always concerned about it. A lot of times when she was younger, she went hungry. On the humorous side though, she hates camping. Her answer is always the same: I camped because it was fun. She camped because they couldn't afford hotels. For me, my love of camping started from growing up poor. The only family vacations my single mom and brother and I had were family reunion events several states away. It involved long road trips in a shitty car with no AC, but we got to camp in tents and get a break from reality. We also ate a lot better over a campfire than me making hamburger helper for my brother while my mom went to bed early. She worked hard to support us and battled with depression untreated for years until she could afford medication. Those trips were good for all of us. I remember living 6 kids, my oldest brother had left already, and 2 parents in an old single-wide trailer, and that was the happiest time of my life. One of the saddest was when my dad later bought a TV. Before that we all talked. I get giddy with excitement after grocery shopping trips. It just feels so good to have enough food. Though I still have to constantly remind myself I'm allowed to eat it if I'm hungry. I'm a grown-up. I bought it. That and snacks. We were never allowed to snack between meals and never bought anything extra that wasn't absolutely necessary. My husband had to teach me, you buy something tasty that you don't actually need, and then you can just eat it whenever you feel like. Amazing. I still don't really do it, but it's nice to know I can. It is this logic that's motivating me to try and get a decent salary. I cannot wait until I can just buy a thing and eat it whenever, instead of planning my entire budget and seeing if there's room for it. Kevin Hart has a funny bit about how he hates camping. He talks about how hard he worked to never sleep outside again and how disappointed his family would be to see him camping. Ha ha. Ha. Trevor Noah has pretty much that same bit, down to his grandmother wailing, "What happened to Trevor? I thought he was successful." LOL. My mom hates camping. She always says you can pretend to be a homeless person if you want. I'm staying in a hotel. She and her mother lived with her grandfather to not be homeless because her grandfather owned a house. She was putting community college payments on her credit card and building debt with it. I paid off her credit cards when we were dating and she cried from me being so nice. It was only like $1,300. I bought a condo, then we got married, then we bought a house. I never really considered myself rich until I started dating her and learned that a trip to Wendy's was a treat. I grew up middle class, and we are currently middle class. Only $1,300? That's definitely an amount to cry over, and most people I know would be so grateful for that much. Context really does matter in life. $1,300 would completely change my outlook on life right now, sad as that is. This thread really drives the point home that I'm fucking lucky. And I'm only middle class going on upper middle class at some point, hopefully. A trip to Wendy's was a treat. You've basically just summarized my entire struggle with finances and food. I grew up working class, dad's a welder, mom stayed at home with us, and eating out, even just at McDonald's, was a huge treat. But now that I'm on my own and making money, I can have that treat every day if I want. My fiance recently pointed this out to me and I'm working on it, but that habit is so damn hard to break. Edit. OMG, my first gold. Thank you, kind stranger. Also, to address a common question about welders making a lot of money, I've copy-pasted my response to an earlier comment. Depends on where you're at, I think. My dad was making around $20 HR working full-time, but he also was paying more than half of his monthly income to his ex-wife for child support, 2 older half-brothers, and alimony. So he may have been making good money, we just didn't see most of it. Additionally, we were in a tiny town in Texas in the 90s, and Dad wasn't very interested in moving up the ladder, and or the company he was with wasn't eager to have him move up. Things got much easier in the past couple years when he switched companies and moved up to general foreman in construction right before retiring. I think I'm pretty well off, but damn, with the 2 kids, the wife, McDonald's costs around $30 now, haha. You don't even need the kids, my wife always finds a way to somehow find the most expensive assortment of food at any restaurant. How the hell is our tab from the Chinese place $32? My share was only $6.99, oh, right. I've never understood this. I grew up poor and so did my wife, and she will spend so much money on food, we'll bring the leftovers home, and she won't touch it ever again. I've actually started ordering less because of this. I'll get a small meal, while she has a huge one, and I'll just eat what she doesn't finish, which is usually half. I think you underestimate how rich you are if you could drop $1,300 on someone else's credit card debt. Or maybe my family isn't as middle class as I think they are, Lumeo. I am on the other side, as I married a girl from a rich family, although we both are in the same, and I tend to worry about money savings future. Through the years I have realized that she worries less about it and still saves more and spends less than me. I feel like coming from a lower middle class family makes me think about saving more, but at the same time I spend money on things as I could not have them all before I got my own job. I am so like this. I think and plan and budget, but when my paycheck comes it is so hard to not spend it all on going out to eat or other frivolous things because I could never have those small luxuries before. Ouch, these are all me. I'm the one from the poorer family, and I worry all the time about money, yet I've somehow become the spender in the relationship. He doesn't think twice about retirement, but saves more than me, because damn it, I'm tired of leaving things I want in my shopping cart for 5 years before I buy it. I am not well off, but my stepfather is. I was raised by a single mom who spent money on everything and bills were always behind. She just couldn't manage her money at all. In her 50s she met and married a multi-millionaire. We are in middle America, so that goes further than maybe in a lot of areas. They have given themselves $10,000 a month budget to live on, living on interest. Own their home. Anyway, once my mom met him and they got all her finance situated and paid off, she won't spend a penny. He spends like it is going out of style. He has actually begged me to take her shopping to get clothes and accessories. She won't do it. She spent more when she was a single mom with nothing. It makes no sense to me. At least buy a new outfit. She is hell-bent to not use a penny of his money. They barely even have any groceries. If they have anything, it is because he buys it for them. She is a retired nurse that gets her retirement in SS, but she won't spend anything. She lives poorer now than any other time in her life. This sounds less like a financial issue and more like she's trying to preserve her pride. She knows that people will think she's a gold digger if she spends his money, so she's going to the opposite extreme and refusing to benefit from any of it. Edit, maybe anxiety is a better way to describe it than pride. Absolutely, sounds like she doesn't want to come off as a gold digger who spends her husband's money. But also, she may have realized that she doesn't really need to spend much anymore if basics are covered and she doesn't have young kids anymore. My mom spends very little money, as does my dad. They have money, but they've always been frugal. I realize that the biggest expense has always been us kids. Piano lessons for us, trips for us to see grandparents, dinner if it's our birthdays, toys every so often. Now they don't have to spend on that stuff. They occasionally eat out, they travel a bit, but usually that's paid for by my dad's company, so they just don't spend much. They don't enjoy spending in and of itself, they just spent money in the past to take care of family. She should talk to a financial advisor. My mom inherited a decent chunk of money from my grandparents and she just couldn't accept that it would be enough to take care of whatever she needed until she actually sat down and had somebody show her the numbers. She is a very intelligent and sensible person, but there was a disconnect for her between the idea of things being expensive versus the factual math until she could really see it. The idea of living comfortably off compound interest without ever touching the principal just wasn't something that made sense to her. Even after talking with an advisor, I still had to re-emphasize this stuff for a while. Mom, you can absolutely replace your 10-year-old car with a new Corolla. That's not a ridiculous thing to do. You can absolutely go on a fun trip every year. This stuff won't destroy you anymore. It made me sad for her at first to see her worry so much needlessly, but it's been awesome to see her turn into somebody who isn't afraid of her own finances anymore. Anyway, I guess my point is that financial ignorance is something that is surprisingly common even among people who are otherwise very intelligent, and that sometimes these kind of abstract ideas about compound interest don't translate to reality until they're demonstrated or explained in a real-world way that translates to that person's actual life. This right there, Yudnaka. She will not listen to you, because you're her kid. She will not listen to him because it's his money. She is more likely to listen to an independent expert who will help her create a monthly budget, backed up by actual math. I didn't marry this woman, but when we started dating, she always wanted to chill at my place, never hers. Which was fine. But she gained 35 pounds in just like a few months of dating. She was 100 pounds when we started dating, not that it was a bad thing. 1, I am a chubby man, and 2, I was just glad she wasn't pregnant. Anyway, turns out her family couldn't afford dinner sometimes. So suddenly she had a place to eat every night and gorged herself. I know 2 siblings who were starved by their father for years until CPS took them away and placed them with their biological mother. From there, they gained at least 100 pounds respectively and will not stop gorging themselves on food. At first, I didn't understand, but now that I am older, I know. Food scarcity is traumatizing. That was me when I went to live with my aunt. I put on like 80 pounds in high school because I suddenly had 3 full meals a day and snack and dessert and no self-control. It's been a battle since. Hard to develop self-control when you have years of the programmed response: eat while it's available, it won't be there long. I just realized that applies to me. We were poor when I was a small kid, but then my dad got a decent job. The oldest 2 kids are over 300 and 400 pounds, while the youngest 2 are each around 180 and 150 pounds. Food scarcity trauma really makes sense. There was a post somewhere I read a few weeks ago that was supposedly from a mother asking if her kids were spoiled for wanting to eat more than 1,000 calories per day as teenagers. I honestly can't comprehend how parents think starving their children is a good idea. I had friends that fostered, and eventually adopted, 2 kids. The oldest, about 7 at the time, would always go to the cupboard or fridge and just stand with the door open and look at the food. Sometimes she'd wake up crying in the middle of the night, and the only way to get her to stop was to open those doors and show her there was food. It was heartbreaking to realize she responded that way because she was regularly starved and had nothing to eat before CPS placed her with my friends. She'd have nightmares of empty cupboards regularly until she finally felt safe in her new home. Fat, pregnant. There has never been a truer statement. Source, father of 2. LOL, I just had this convo with my fiancé. He goes, your boobs look bigger, and I responded with, yeah, and I gained 10 pounds and I am not sure why. We both paused, looked at each other, and without acknowledging what we were thinking, I was like, I should get my period at the end of the week, so we will see. Not pregnant, just got fat, lol. Edit, Alan, if you are assuming I am very overweight, I am not. I am 5 feet 3 inches and 140, normally, and lift regularly, so I am normal. Just happened to be the perfect mix of bed eating, my period, and lack of gym attendance that made me put that weight on so quickly. I am back to my normal weight once I stopped eating like shit, still not pregnant. This what happened to me in my last relationship. I soon moved in and gained about 20 pounds within a couple of months. Dinner every night was wild. I remembered that I wasn't even hungry, I was just excited for food. That's what happened with my wife and I. Cooking for one meant I made 1 or 2 meals a week and just split it into a bunch of portions. Turns out my wife loves my cooking compared to her mom's very bland food growing up. It also helps that I absolutely love cooking for other people. However, she's not all about eating the same thing all week, so we would eat 4 or 6 servings worth of food per meal just for me to cook again and eat the whole thing the next day. Now we're working on losing the extra weight. I fell in love with my uni best friend who really didn't have any money. When I got a job, for my birthday I decided to plan a holiday and offered to bring him along. It didn't even occur to me that this was his first ever holiday he'd ever taken. His family could never afford it growing up, and he never really thought to do it as an adult. Edit, RIP inbox, thank you all for the love and support. I really feel this one. My family did maybe 2 vacation-type trips in 18 years of growing up, and both of those were to places relatively close by few hours of driving. If it wasn't for a couple of school-sponsored trips, I probably would have never left my region of the US until I was an adult, and I still haven't left the country. I remember in college, there was a school-sponsored trip for a class I was taking that involved air travel. The look on another student's face when I told him I'd never flown before was absolutely priceless. Now, as an adult with a middle-class white-collar job, it still boggles my mind to listen to coworkers talk about all the trips and cruises they take and talk about flying to Disneyland for just a weekend getaway. I can't get myself into the mindset of someone who can actually afford to travel now, because it just hasn't been a part of my life at all. I've never been able to afford travel, but have still been to a ton of places because of my mother's job. She worked at a travel agency, and checked out hotels to see if they were suitable for her agency's clients. It's really weird being in the I can't afford to travel and the I've been to all these places camps simultaneously. It's really weird being in the I can't afford to travel and the I've been to all these places camps simultaneously. I'm there right now. The worst part is that I work for an airline and get flight benefits, but I can't afford ground transportation or accommodation. Still haven't flown, but I've traveled a lot as a kid. Edit, just to give a little more info, I'm not a salaried employee, but a subcontractor with no PTO. My flight privileges are the 3rd from the bottom, which means anyone with a higher seniority can bump me off the standby waitlist. If I really plan it out, I definitely can, but at the loss of pay. Honestly, it sucks and it feels like I don't even actually have flight benefits. My partner and I are both poor, but different kinds of poor. She's never been homeless or not had enough to eat, while I have. She's extremely frugal and hates buying anything we don't need. I feel a desperate need to stock up if we have any extra money, and it's a fight for me not to fill our house with canned and dry goods in case we don't have enough money to buy food next month for some reason. It makes no sense, but my instinct is to hoard food because there just was never enough of it around growing up. It makes no sense, but my instinct is to hoard food because there just was never enough of it around growing up. That makes perfect sense. I'm not rich at all, but my husband came from a very poor Mexican village. He told me he used to shower outside, because there was no in-house plumbing, and used leaves as toilet paper. I mean, there's poor, and there's my husband's previous life poor. He's been living in the US for 12 years now, but when we first met it was so interesting seeing life through his childlike eyes. Going to the cinema was a huge event for him. Heating food up in a microwave was a totally foreign concept. And staying at fancy hotels when we went on vacation was like whoa. I still see him surprised by things now and then, and it just reminds me how much I take my middle status class for granted. Mexican here, you'd be surprised how common that really is. In Tantoyuca there is a hill called Hollywood where there is no plumbing and no government help. There are women who make tamales and other large-numbered meals for every kid in the neighborhood because their parents can't feed them and we don't abandon our own. Also, it's very common to be shocked by things like fancy hotels because ours are nice, sure, but there is rich gringo nice, and it always appalls me on the TV. Mexican here as well. When I first visited an American house I imagined that it was a rich people house. Now after living here for a while I see that it was just your average middle-class house, but compared to how we lived in Mexico, 5 people in a bedroom because that's the only place we had AC, seeing a house with central AC seemed like luxurious living to me. I have an employee at work who just arrived in the United States from Africa in March of 2018. He had been working at a recycling plant, a job the government gave him because he's a refugee, until I hired him to work as a custodian on a Marine Corps base. He marveled at how big and beautiful the MCX was. It's really a department store about half the size of a regular Walmart, so I told him to schedule himself a lunch break at a certain time and I drove him to the Pentagon City Shopping Center right down the street. I think he almost passed out because of all the colors and lights and sparkly stuff. In the food court he picked McDonald's even though there were much better options available. He ate a quarter of his Big Mac and like 3 fries and started to pack it up back in the bag. I asked him what he was doing and he said he was going to bring it home to his family. I said bullshit, eat your lunch. And while he was finishing, because he ate very slowly, I went back up to the counter and bought a $20 McDonald's gift certificate. He thanked me like I had donated a kidney. Before we left we went back up to the counter and cashed in the gift certificate for 3 Happy Meals and a bunch of burgers. I am also pretty sure that he didn't finish his original Big Mac combo and stuffed some of that in the bag with the rest of it. On the drive back he said to me, in my country my dreams were never so big as this. I remember that every time I start to feel sorry for myself. One of my exes could pull in a lot of money, easily twice or thrice what I could. He was so incredibly bad at saving this money. Down to, say, setting himself up as a company to avoid paying higher rate of tax, but then paying a large amount each month to an accounting company to handle his taxes, which he'd do himself anyway because he didn't trust him to get it right. He'd pay for taxis from one end of the city to another or hire cars rather than use public transport. Flights canceled? Book new ones, never bothered to claim back on insurance. Buy a sports car, wreck it, sell it for scrap. He'd work contracts and then take time off to work on his own startup, but spend every weekend just going out and buying drugs and booze. I thought it was really fun and wild at first, haha, money really means nothing to you. But when we became a long-term couple I started feeling like his mother. Man, will you not just fill out the insurance paperwork? I had an ex that must have made 6 figures as a specialty electrician of some sort but legitimately had no clue how much, because his work would pay for things for him. I have no idea how it all worked out, but his work paid for all of his lodging and reoccurring bills, cable, utilities, weekly maid service, so he had no idea how much any of that stuff was. Even after that, he ate out, drank, and smoked constantly, had multiple state-of-the-art entertainment systems, played hockey, had Yankees season tickets, $10,000 plus, and kept envelopes of cash from cashed paychecks around his house. I asked once how he does his taxes, company handled it. Edit, oh. And had multiple DUIs where he or the company paid for a lawyer and then did at least one of those rehab programs where you're monitored and drug tested constantly. I can't imagine any of that was cheap. My cousin has a setup sorta like this, but it's BC. He started with the company when it was in its infancy and now it's huge, so they take care of him BC of how much work he's done. Same trade and pretty sure same type of job, too. Now he's a part owner or investor, so it's on a bigger level now. He's incredibly practical though. The largest newspaper in the state did a puff piece on him and he legitimately had no idea why it was a big deal. They still live in the same house and keep the same lifestyle for the most part. He's a good guy. Yep, same situation. He was like their first employee and was like a son to the co-owner. My husband grew up in a family where they were comfortable but on a strict budget. 6 kids and mom on disability. My family had no budget. One day we were at the grocery store and he always insists on walking up and down every aisle. I finally lost it because he was taking so long and asked him why he did it. Growing up we could only spend $100 a week on groceries for all of us. I always had to put what I wanted back because we couldn't afford it. Now I can afford whatever I want, so I like to look at everything I could have. Took him 10 years to tell me this. I felt like a terrible person. Edit, thanks for the silver kind homies. Edit number 2, I've had a few people, very few, comment that $100 a week is a huge budget and how is that a stretch? We live in a city with an extremely high cost of living. It's in the top 30 in the world. Getting a family of 4 fed for that much weekly would be a huge stretch here, and his family did an amazing job. My dad is a successful business owner now with several houses and multiple sources of income. But he grew up dirt poor when he had parents, and became even poorer when he was out on his own at 14. Think sleeping on the floor of a gas station men's room. To this day he will take a small handful of cereal out of his bowl before he pours milk in and put it back in the box, so he'll always have some cereal for later. Over 40 years later, and the pain and worry of growing up poor without luxuries like breakfast cereal still affect him. Growing up without money does shitty things to people. Edit, thanks for the gold, kind stranger. Traumatic experiences can affect people for years. I remember reading a story about an American steamship in the 19th century that sunk, and the survivors were adrift for days, weeks. Only one many survived but nearly starved to death, and until the day he died many years later, he would eat extra food every day just in case. My grandma grew up during the Great Depression. To this day she always offers half of her food multiple times and saves a few bites just in case we might want it. My grandmother grew up at the tail end of the Great Depression. Her family was extremely poor. My great-grandfather had left them, but my great-grandmother owned a house. They were so poor my grandmother didn't have toys to play with and food was always scarce. They were so poor that my grandmother's youngest sister was given up for adoption to my great-great-aunt because they couldn't afford food for Hag-6, and my aunt was well off. When I was a teenager living with my grandmother, she basically rationed how much food was made even though she was upper middle class. She died the day before her 69th birthday and all of our family misses her greatly. I have family in Nuremberg that bought a beautiful house from a Russian man who had custom built it from the ground up. He had gotten lost in Siberia during a snowstorm and promised himself that he would build his dream house if he ever got out alive. It has a pool and sauna in the basement and heated floors throughout. Dude absolutely deserved it, in my opinion. If I recall correctly, he lost some fingers and toes to frostbite but was otherwise okay. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, our grandparents' generation were the kids of the Depression. Many of them were broken about money and food and stuff. Hoarding things, counting pennies like drops of blood, raging over wasted slivers of bath soap, driving 20 miles to save 3 cents on a gallon of gas. Buying clothes from a thrift shop, wearing clothes until they fell apart. All this long after they were financially secure. I was on disability and below the poverty line until I graduated college, and this was the best thing about my first real job. I could go into the grocery store and buy whatever I wanted. It was so freeing not to have to keep a running total in my head. I felt like a king. Credit cards were avoided. For me growing up, we were encouraged to get a credit card in our name and use it as much as possible in order to build credit. There was always money to pay it off each month, so it made sense to 1, build credit, and 2, collect airline miles or whatever the reward was back in the day. When we got together, she always used cash or a debit card. She had a credit card for emergencies and avoided using it otherwise. It took a long time to get her over her aversion skepticism. We were fortunate to have 2 good-paying jobs, though it also taught me a healthy appreciation for what it means to have a financial cushion. The logic of buying things on credit that you could buy with cash in order to build a credit score is pretty weird when you think about it. You're basically taking out a loan that you don't need to show you're responsible with money. It's reasoning by analogy. Why do employers hire people who got good grades? Surely not because they do fake exercise as well, but rather because they have proven that they can follow directions over and over, etc. Surely not because they do fake exercise as well, but rather because they have proven that they can follow directions over and over, etc. Same with degrees. Even if the degree isn't relevant to the job, a degree proves you've got the stability and resources to stick with something long-term, can handle a variety of different tasks, and can presumably work under a variety of different people even if you don't like them well enough to accomplish a minimum of something. Plus, people with student loans can't just quit their job because they're unhappy. Everything about credit scores is pretty much bullshit, but that's how things are, so you've got to play the game. I recently paid off my student loans early, killed my credit score. After this I learned that early payoff isn't what the bank wants to incentivize on loans that don't have front-loaded interest. I paid my debt but stiffed them for the interest. They prefer customers who are perpetually in debt. Now, that score is not worth the money I saved by paying off early, but it's going to be a long while until I can get a good rate on another loan. Edit, based on the comments here, this may not be entirely correct. All I really know is that those things happened at the same time, not that they were related. You might want to check on how they closed your loan. I had a car loan that I paid off early and the person who closed my account used the wrong code and it tanked my score. They used a code that said they just forgave the loan even though I paid every penny. I went and talked with them and they fixed it. Annex 200E, your credit shouldn't be negatively affected by paying off a loan early. It shouldn't be affected much, but it should drop it a few points. If you have otherwise good credit, it won't be a big deal, though. Correct, depending on how the rest of your profile looks, there are 3 ways this can have a negative impact on your score. 1. Decrease in utilization percentage. You are now using $500 $10,000 instead of $1,500 $40,000. 2. Decrease in average age of accounts. Loan was 10 years old, now your average credit is 5 years instead of 7 years. 3. Unfavorable mix of credit accounts. Now all 3 of your accounts are credit cards instead of 3 cards and 1 fixed loan. Taking out a 0% interest loan and getting rewards if you pay your full balance every month. I can answer this one. I did not grow up rich by any means, but I would say my family was upper middle class. My husband was born in Nicaragua and eventually moved to Texas where his mother barely scraped by supporting him and his brother. Some of the things that surprised me. 1. He never eats snacks. Ever. They didn't have food in their kitchen and he would go hungry sometimes. He said once they had an egg in the kitchen and he scrambled it and split it with his brother while his mom hungrily looked on. Now as an adult he doesn't understand snacking. If we eat a banana he thinks that is our next meal. 2. He is very impressed with smaller things in life. He had one toy as a kid, truck, and now, anything I get him he thinks is the most amazing thing in the world. He saves everything. 3. He is the hardest worker I know. He never wants to be where he was. 4. He is the most grateful, optimistic person I know. We've been having some problems, family drama, trying to sell our house, work stuff, etc. He is not afflicted by any of it, he is cool as a cucumber. He always says, "Did you eat today? Do you have a place to sleep? Does someone love you? Then you are better than most people." I dearly love him. He makes me see the world in a different, better way. He always says, "Did you eat today? Do you have a place to sleep? Does someone love you? Then you are better than most people." Most of us could benefit from repeating that often. Also, are you healthy? Are you healthy? As someone with a fiancé who has a chronic disease, that hits home. My experience is from the opposite perspective. I was the poor one. It absolutely floored me how my wife acts when something broke, like a car, appliances, clothes, etc. As a child living below the poverty line, replacing a tire or other necessities was a disaster, requiring tricky trade-offs in the budget or just plain acceptance of just how boned you were. When my wife's phone broke, I went into full panic mode while she shrugged and said, "We can just a new one this afternoon." And then we did. Edit, wow, I have received a lot of responses on this. By far my most upvoted comment. You guys made my day, thank you. I have seen a few repair comments. Like many of you, I am also a Picasso MacGyver of the duct tape and trash bag world. This skill helped me break into IT. Sadly, the phone was beyond repair. Trust me, if I could have fixed it, I would have. And thank you for the silver. Last edit, you all are giving me too many medals. I am very flattered, but this is going to spoil me. In my case, I'm from the wealthy family and my partner grew up poor. A couple months ago, our new TV from a big box store broke suddenly. He had bought a warranty, which I never do. I didn't think they worked. He spent like 5 hours on the phone over 3 days and got us a replacement TV, which is not something I would ever have done or thought of doing, which makes me sound so spoiled, but I learned something for sure. To be fair, for most smaller items, especially electronics, warranties are statistically a bad idea. I've never purchased a warranty in my life and would never have used one even if I did. In my experience, electronics usually break immediately, within 30 or so days and covered by manufacturer, or they'll run for years. In addition, places don't offer warranties to help you out, they offer you them to make money. They've done the research and know that statistically they will make money on that warranty. Therefore, the only reason to get a warranty with an item is if you couldn't afford to replace it, and in that case you maybe shouldn't be buying it, or a cheaper option, in the first place. Warranties for bullshit little things like small appliances and electronics are one of those things that help keep struggling people struggling. In the EU, everything comes with a mandatory 2 years warranty. If people did use them as intended, every time something broke, all the cheap, useless appliances would disappear from the market. The fact everyone throws away cheap stuff that breaks causes much pollution. I can completely identify with this. I wouldn't say I grew up poor, just working class with parents who didn't prioritize saving at all, but something like that was always an absolute emergency. I remember recently having a conversation with my mom a few months ago when I lost my phone. I told her about it, and she totally freaked out, went into panic mode, and asked me what I was gonna do. I just calmly said I'm gonna buy a new one from the emergency fund I've been saving. And X200E, edit, and now one of my most upvoted comments on Reddit is something where it sounds like I'm dissing my parents. Just to clarify, we weren't super poor, they always made sure we had enough, and I think they have been wonderful parents. The concept of putting a portion of your income toward an emergency fund, not saving for something specific, that was definitely done every time you get paid, was just not something they really did, and my mom knew I probably had enough to get a new phone. She just gets stressed really easily. As someone who grew up middle class as well as my wife, this is something that our parents did and we do as well. We have a oh shit fund where a slice of every paycheck ends up. It has saved our asses so many times. Just having the cash instead of high-interest credit cards, I can't imagine how much money that's put back in my pocket. I'm kind of going through the opposite experience. As I grew up, my family was able to transition from middle to upper middle, at least by our area's standards. More and more, they drilled into me that when you buy things, it's worth it to spend more for something that lasts, and that if something is broken, you should get it fixed or replaced right away. Now that I'm on my own, I'm living just above the poverty line. It's been a shock to realize how things like car problems, vet bills, urgent care, and other unplanned issues can really cripple your savings in that situation. When I was living with my parents, they just pay for those things, no problem. Now, I let the problems build and build until they reach the breaking point because I can't afford to just take care of them whenever they pop up. For example, a couple of my car doors have issues and have to be opened in special ways, but they still open. I've just been dealing with that, plus a lot of other quirks and small issues, because I can't afford to have them fixed and the car still works even with these issues. The only times I bring it in are when something breaks and the car to stop running, dead battery, blown transmission, etc. Interestingly enough, both my parents grew up in dirt poor families but don't seem to understand my situation. Maybe it's generational differences? Maybe it's the differences in expenses between then and now? Certain things, like food and gas, cost more now. Technology, the job market, etc., and the requirements that go with them have changed. Maybe it's because now that they can pay to fix those issues at all, they see how much more they pay when they let it go and get worse. Poverty charges interest. He was making good money but came from a poor family. One thing that surprised me was the lack of budgeting, no knowledge of a 401k Roth IRA. Retirement seemed like something that he'd never get to do. So even though he made good money, he was starting to rack up credit card debt. Now he's much better at it than I am. He adores budgeting and looks forward to FIRE. Edit, FIRE is financial independence. Retire early. There's a sub attached to this idea, our financial independence. Sorry about the confusion. I'm from the poorer family, not super poor, but my in-laws have a stupid amount of money, so by comparison I'm very poor, but I think I can answer for her. We have 2 young kids, and my wife was shocked when I said we should look for clothes and toys for them at local flea markets and garage sales. The idea never occurred to her that we could save money by getting some gently used items. She had never even been to a garage sale in her life. She has grown to love them and now questions whether it is worth it to buy any item new or not before running to Amazon or a store. Her parents think it's disgusting we make our kids wear clothes that another child had before, but they don't pay my bills. Kids outgrow clothes so fast, most of those used clothes are basically new. Wife and I are not poor, not rich by any means either. We definitely hit up the local mom co-ops where moms sell their used baby kid stuff. Find a bunch of good stuff in there, to the point where we feel stupid for buying new because it's so much more expensive. Anyways, it's not even close to being disgusting. Yeah, if you go garage sale shopping in a nice neighborhood by where I live, you can find Gap kids shorts for a $1 that have been worn maybe 3 times. Rich people's kids have so many clothes that shit rotates out after only a few wears. There was a baby consignment store in Bethesda, MD, which would routinely have designer brands, 7 for All Mankind, Citizen of All Mankind, etc. baby clothes for like $5. My mom was the only person who noticed, but she was quite impressed. Kids outgrow clothes so fast, most of those used clothes are basically new. Which is hilarious when people buy designer items for, in particular, younger kids. My wife loves a charity shop, and has repeatedly found designer label kids stuff for our daughter which look like they've barely been used, and in some cases, actually haven't. Shoes especially. My daughter's had about 4 pairs of Michael Kors trainers, all for less than £5 each. I'm a nanny. My best friend is also a nanny, and her nanny kid has over 50 pairs of Jordans. He's 2. Kids outgrow clothes so fast, and yet parents with newborns, toddlers receive a stupid amount of clothes as gifts for like showers and first, second, third birthdays. My sister has 2 little kids. She said they could, and do, wear outfits like once and then they're never worn again because A, they don't need to given the amount of options, and B, they're too big for them after a couple months. I agree. We had a mother give us tubs full of her boys' clothing from throughout the years for our first boy. She's like, I haven't even used half of this stuff, I just got way too much from friends and family. If you don't do this already, start hitting estate sales for well-made things. Almost all of my kitchen stuff is 50+ years old. Pots, pans, blender, toaster, cooking utensils. They were made 100% better than the majority of crap out now. There is well-made stuff made today, but it is $$, $$. And garden other tools. I have not purchased a new garden tool, regular tool, in ages. In addition to being well-made, older people took good care of their shit in general. Estate sales are also the only place I can find quality 100% cotton blankets. Heavy, tightly woven, and they breathe. I don't typically buy clothes at estate sales unless I need a jacket or coat. Picked up a super nice hunting coat for $10, and last week a regular men's zip-up jacket for $5. Perfect condition on both. I use them for dog walking in cold weather. The hunting coat is the best, ETA because of all the questions, where to find estate sales, Find estate sales webpage. Pro tip: if you buy bedding, clothing, etc., seal in a garbage bag in your trunk. Wash immediately and dry for 2 cycles. I am paranoid of bedbugs. For furniture, check thoroughly. Dressers can harbor them too. If an item can't be washed because it's too big, I bought a TV pillow once. Find a laundromat with big vertical washers, or dry it on high for 2-3 cycles. Pretty much anything you buy should be inspected on site, and then cleaned when you get home. Pantry moths and roaches can hitch rides. Not only the adults, but eggs can be hiding on items. Clean them. I agree with you that estate sales are a great way to find quality stuff. They were made 100% better than the majority of crap out now. Well, they were also 100% better than the majority of crap out then. The crap stuff is gone now, because it was crap. This is called survivorship bias. You can get excellent quality stuff made new, if you're willing to pay for it. I've got a 100% wool blanket I bought new, cause it was winter, I had no blankets, and wasn't going to wait. Heavy, tightly woven, breathes great, it'll probably last me the rest of my life. I live in the neighborhood that's adjacent to the rich neighborhood. Sometimes I go cruising for garage sales, since they'll get rid of very nice things for cheap just to get the space back. I just moved from outside of Seattle to a more rural area outside of Albuquerque. Almost everything is cheaper here, but we are now realizing just how many amazing deals on relatively new items we would get up there. And X200E, our TV was $15 used because it wasn't smart enough for the user who wanted a better one. I just use a Fire Stick. Oh, and it only outputs at 1080p instead of 4K. And X200E, we had gotten the riding lawnmower up there for about $300 and sold it for $500 when we left, with a pasture drag, so overall it was about break even, which was great, but we can't find one that runs down here for anywhere near that low a price. Probably we'll have to buy new. And X200E. Seriously, if you live near a wealthy neighborhood, shop their estate and garage sales, join the Facebook pages for buy-sell in the area. It's worth it. Her parents think it's disgusting we make our kids wear clothes that another child had before. There's this neat modern invention called a washing machine. My wife has the same mentality and she grew up poor. I've suggested that when we have kids we should hit up Once Upon a Child for used baby stuff, and she thinks it's gross to buy used stuff even though he'll only use most of it for a year or less and all of it has been cleaned. Once Upon a Child is legit. Babies grow out of that shit so fast. I went there shopping for my pregnant sister and cousin's babies and found a bunch of shit with the original tags still on them for super cheap. When I have my own kids I don't think I'd buy any clothes new. Buying gently used items is a double bonus in my book. I save money, obviously, but I'm also saving a perfectly good item from ending up in a landfill prematurely. Buying everything new all the time is such a visible symptom of a culture of consumerism and wastefulness, especially for kids' items that are used for such a short time. If you have Facebook, I would also recommend looking there for pop-up children's consignment sales in your area. I find those more convenient than garage sales because they aggregate like 200 garage sales worth of kid stuff in one convenient location. TBH, I get the whole spend thing. When you're poor and have cash, so to speak, you don't want to wait as you've generally waited a long time in the first place. Either that or whenever you have spare cash something always breaks, always. I came from a relatively wealthy family, new money. My dad started his own business and grew up poor, and my wife came from a lower-income blue-collar family. We got married out of college and neither made much money in the beginning. My biggest surprise was how she wanted to spend money. She was shocked when my mom bought her $100 plus pair of jeans for a birthday. She couldn't wrap her mind around spending that much on jeans. But she wanted a motorcycle, for me, which I don't ride in the first place. And then a new furniture set. And then a new bed. And then a new car. She wasn't concerned about savings or retirement, and she never wanted my parents' money for any of it. We are both way too proud of that. It took a long time for her to come around to having an emergency savings account, focusing on debt and not needing the other shit. She eventually realized that her parents wouldn't be in such a terrible situation because their spending habits are horrible. She still has it come out sometimes though. We recently paid off my car and she immediately thought I should get a new car. That last sentence got me. My parents live a very comfortable life, never really worrying about money, and at the time had just recently paid off their 3-year-old Cadillac. Yet my dad wanted to look at new ones. I started pointing out that the new one had the same engine and same features, just less miles. He finally came around and they kept it. Ended up keeping that Caddy for almost 10 years. Damn good car. Needs like $1,000 worth of minor repairs and upkeep a year: oil, fluids, tires, brakes, suspension, ECT, and he is considering finally trading it in. I pointed out that it's significantly cheaper than another car payment and he might still keep it. Love seeing a 10-year-old Cadillac in a neighborhood that has nothing but 3-5-year-old premium cars in it. Every time a repair cost comes up I have to remind her that $500 to fix the car or $900 for tires is only 1 or 2 car payments for a new car. That usually helps. I also convinced her to act like we had a car payment and pay ourselves the $400 month into savings, and then we can buy a car without a loan when the time comes. This mentality has actually saved my bacon. A couple years ago I started funneling money to a savings account to prepay vacations. Was the vacation emergency fund. Here I am today and my hoa dues are unexpectedly going way the hell up. The fund is literally saving my ass. This is a really helpful way to think about things. I'm having similar discussions with my fiancée right now, so I'm going to use most of this. Thank you. But she wanted a motorcycle, for me, which I don't ride in the first place. And then a new furniture set. And then a new bed. And then a new car. She wasn't concerned about savings or retirement, and she never wanted my parents' money for any of it. We are both way too proud of that. When you've slept on a shitty stained mattress, driven shitboxes, and worn rags for your whole life, I suppose I understand fixing those things before you start worrying about down the road abstractions like retirement. It's more than just that. When you are poor, you know that the money will be gone. You can stash aside that $1,000 today, but in a week, something will come up, and it'll be gone. So you learn to spend that windfall when you can. So splurge on that new bed, at least you'll have that to show for it. Why bother saving that $, when 3 weeks from now, it'll still be gone, but all you'll have gotten are like, a bill or 2 paid down, or whatever. Not saying any of the above is a good, healthy way to live, but it's a normal thing that happened in a poor household. We had a serviceable bed and car and furniture. And she grew up lower middle class, she didn't wear rags. It was just that her parents never saved a dime and she never learned about compound interest. I grew up with a poor family. I was told credit cards were evil and to never get one by my parents. They had this outlook because they were never taught how to properly use them either. When I finally did have to establish credit and got my first one, I didn't overthink it and just followed the rules and paid it off every month. Then they allowed me more and more credit, more and more cards. An emotionally abusive ex would use my cards for everyday living, promising to pay them off with me. Soon the interest started to snowball and before I knew it I couldn't get out from under it. He ghosted me after 4 years of living together. I was on my own. For about a year I'd get home from work every day and just sob. I was depressed as hell. I met my boyfriend in the midst of all of this. I noticed him always using credit cards and talking about perks and points. He seemed so responsible in the way he used them. It took me a bit to open up to him about my debt, because I was so embarrassed, and it got to the point I felt like there was a weight on my chest 24/7. The late calls, only paying the minimum on each card every month, barely touching the interest. When I finally opened up to him, he sat down with me and said, "We are a team, we'll figure this out together." He helped me go over all of my interest and cards and see what the best option for me was. He offered to pay it all off with his work bonus that year and I pay him back, but we hadn't been together long, and I didn't love him for his money. I didn't even feel comfortable with him paying for dinner often. I knew I had to get out of this myself. One day when I saw him, he gave me an envelope and told me not to open it till I got home. He gifted me $1,000. I did not want to accept it and felt horrible doing so. He told me he hoped it'd help the burden and do with it whatever I wanted, or even something to treat myself since I couldn't do that for so long. I asked him if he minded if I used it to pay for a lawyer to file bankruptcy. He said he'd support me in doing so. I did end up filing. It was scary, but I've never made a better decision in my life. Felt like 1,000 pounds were lifted off my chest. It doesn't directly relate to the amount of money they had, I don't think, but their place was always filthy. I mean, dog shit everywhere. Miso lived with his mom sometimes, but would rotate between her and his father, and both places were this way. Dishes piled up, floors were grimy, the place stunk of dog pee and cigarette smoke. One time, I used the bathroom at one of his parents' places, and had to spread my feet while sitting on the toilet to avoid stepping in period blood. I mean, it was so disgusting. Miso was baffled when, after we first got married and moved in with each other, every day he would come home to a, generally, I'm not perfect, spotless home. Now, on the flip side, I once dated a guy whose stepfather was a lawyer, so they lived a lavish lifestyle. The only thing that he was surprised about when it came to my lifestyle was that I did not eat pizza with knife, fork, and a glass of wine. LOL. Now, on the flip side, I once dated a guy whose stepfather was a lawyer, so they lived a lavish lifestyle. The only thing that he was surprised about when it came to my lifestyle was that I did not eat pizza with knife, fork, and a glass of wine. LOL. This sounds like a poor person's simulation of a fancy night out. LOL. Yeah, this is me. My cheap red wine pairs well with pizza. Cheap white wine pairs well with string cheese. Raises pinky. I grew up in a lower-income family, not dirt poor, but my parents' house was, and still is, dirty. They do not vacuum as frequently as they should, floors are grimy, stuff piled everywhere, almost borderline hoarders. The basement is unlike anybody's house I have ever seen. At one point it was finished, but they let it degrade with junk piled everywhere, mouse poop on everything, and they don't seem to care. It sometimes pains me to go back and visit with my husband because he grew up in a rich household that was picked up and clean. I am embarrassed that my parents live this way. Throwaway because I don't put this kind of info on my real account. 40-ish now. Met now wife early 30s. I don't have fuck you money but I'm well paid. Grew up upper middle class and was making a few bucks shy of six figures by the time we met. She grew up in poverty, homeless at times, and dad went AWOL when she was 10. She had gotten an associate's working full-time but was making mid-20s in a shit-paying field when we met. We both got a lot of lessons about how the other half rocks finances, but our first co-owned car was a serious trip for both of us. We weren't married yet but we were headed there. I suggested we get her a new car and get a view into what sounds like a dystopian nightmare. She thinks I mean a 10-year-old injury trap to replace her 20-year-old death trap. I'm imagining a shining chariot of airbags, crumble zones and anti-lock brakes. She's telling stories about being bullied by car salesmen into the only thing she could afford up front because even if she could get a loan for something better, the interest rate would basically be usury. When we go to buy it, she sees what it's like to buy a car when you have high credit, high income and the ability to walk away. We basically walk in and I say, this is what I want. This is the price my credit union pre-negotiated with your boss. If you want me to finance with you, tell me your best rate and I'll tell you if it's good enough. We walk out with a 0.9% loan we'll pay off a few months later, just to pump her credit score. The real lesson was still to come though. 6 months later, there was a nasty storm and she's in an accident. It's totaled. Another car is totaled. 2 other cars are damaged. In her world, life was basically over. My phone rings and it's her sobbing, I crashed the car. I ruined it. It's broken. Everything is ruined. I'm instantly an adrenaline-fueled panic machine. I can hear a siren blaring in the background. She's hopping. She must be injured. Over and over I'm asking where they're taking her while running around the house grabbing wallet keys etc and banging on my neighbor's door to ask if I can borrow their car. For a good minute we're just talking past each other. Then she hears what I'm asking. I'm at XXX whatever lane. The car is ruined. The other car is ruined. I'm not hurt. I might have a bruise on my shoulder tomorrow. My glasses are broken. That's when it hits me, the only insurance she's ever dealt with before is his state minimum liability. She's worried about the cost. But when we got the car, we added collision and 250, 500, 250, and I added her to my liability umbrella. Approximately 8,000 barrels of adrenaline coursing through my bloodstream vaporizes. This is fine. Call the insurance company. They'll pay for everything. Make sure you tell them about the shoulder in case you have to go to the doctor. They'll probably pay for new glasses too. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Had a new car in the driveway a week later. Edit, just checked the throwaway and saw this actually got responses, notes and clarifications. She was earning mid-20K when we met. We're both in our early 30s. She's actually a little older than me. She actually works a lot harder than I do, then and now. She works in a field that makes the world a better place. I work in a field that makes a lot of money. Synergy is awesome. I've had to bootstrap myself through a fair bit of misfortune outside the scope of this story, but there is no doubt in my mind I would have been totally fucked if I'd been dealt her opening hand. No doubt whatsoever. These days she makes above the national median while still making the world a better place. Same field, just having some stability in her life for the first time. Let focus on career development instead of trying to figure out how not to get evicted all the time. It's amazing how quickly people can pull themselves up when they have stable housing, transportation and food. I'm glad I was able to give her a platform to build on, but she did all the work. Finally, for the sewer dwellers in the deepest, darkest corners of the comments, I'm really sorry someone broke your heart. I hope you recover someday. It sounds like you're exactly the kind of person your wife needs. Good for both of you. About to marry him. We met in college and my parents paid for everything while he had student loans and a part-time job to pay for everything else. If he was really hurting, his parents would transfer $40 into his account. But that was pretty rare and they'd give him hell if he asked. He was always very anxious about spending money and never bought name brands. He would also buy essentials like toilet paper by 2 rolls at a time, 1 ply only. He didn't really realize that buying so little every few days was wasting money rather than buying in bulk. When we booked our first vacation, cheap road trip to Georgia, he couldn't pay for anything and was worried the whole time. The anxiety that would keep him up at night made me so sad. He still never fills up his gas tank all the way, only $10 at a time. Drives me nuts. But now we both have great full-time jobs and he rarely has any anxiety. He never has to worry about money anymore and is so much happier as a result. My family is far from rich, but I grew up closer to the upper middle class realm and was making 3 times as much as my now husband when we met. He grew up extremely poor, and his family is still living that way. One big difference is how he's surprised that my parents pick up the check when we go out to celebrate a birthday or a graduation, and that my parents ask him to pick whatever restaurant he wants. Outside of the ritziest steakhouse in town, they don't care. To his family, a big meal out is going to McDonald's and not eating off the dollar menu. I'm serious. I remember a little over a year ago when my mom came into a bit of money from a disability case. Soon afterward, we went out to eat at a restaurant, and she told me it was the first time in her life she ever ordered at a restaurant without looking at the prices first. Differences in our childhoods. Disneyland. Me, went to Disneyland often. Part of the experience was eating the expensive ass food there. Her, did not go often, brought in food, and X200E, Birthdays, Christmas, me, had big parties with lots of friends, gifts, her, no gifts, didn't really celebrate, and X200E, expectations and disappointments, me, because I was never constantly growing up in disappointments, I didn't care if something didn't work out as I expected, I took a chance anyways, her, constant disappointment, so as a defense mechanism, she never expected much anymore out of fear of disappointment. My wife earned many times more than I did when I was a high school teacher back when we were dating. She sometimes would drive my 10-year-old primer black, stick-shift Honda Civic that my cousin lent me until I could buy another car. She was blown away how aggressively mean people are to you when you drive an ugly old car. When she got out of the car, the spell lifted. I got a lot of respect from her for that. She seemed to think I was a saint for not turning sour over it. I was constantly getting pulled over by cops and let go, targeted by road rage, and also pedestrians felt too comfortable engaging with me. I drive a newer Honda, 1 year old, now, and it is so different. I drive the same but probably drive a bit more aggressively now that I can't hear the wind roaring by when I'm going over 40 miles per hour. I haven't been pulled over and haven't had a negative interaction on the road in a long time. Also, my wife now enjoys trading cars with me. Targeted by road rage, and also pedestrians felt too comfortable engaging with me. I've never understood that. Yeah, let's road rage against the person's piece of shit car that's barely holding together in my brand new $50,000 truck. What could go wrong? I give shitkins on the road a wide berth. I think they are more likely to not care if their car gets damaged, so they'll do stupid shit on the road. Can confirm. I drive a shitkin, and when people drive crazy around me, the only thing I am thinking is about how much more they'll regret it in the end. One time I bumped this girl in front of me lightly. Like 5 mph, she went to pull out of a turn and a jackass sped through his stop sign and she slammed her brakes. And we pulled over. She was happy nothing was wrong with her car, and when she turned her attention to my car, I just laughed and waved at it, saying something like, "Don't worry about it," before proceeding to double-check that she was okay with her car. I accidentally backed into a shitkin in a parking lot in my own shitkin Jeep once. The owner couldn't figure out which one of the 100 dings I had caused, and I couldn't either. Same for my Jeep. There are certain benefits to owning a shitkin, like the hit me, I don't care mentality you can adopt. I love that Jeep, but it would have been a blessing if someone totaled it for me. I used to drive this complete shitkin Ford Focus. I hated it with every fiber of my being. One day I'm headed home from work just thinking about how much I hated life in general. Some dude in a lifted F-250 comes flying up behind me. Tries to pass illegally, but another car pops over the hill. He has to slam on brakes and swerves to get back into his lane. Clips my back end doing it and sends me spinning down the road, through a wood neighborhood sign, back out onto the road where I got clipped by oncoming traffic before coming to a stop. Took me a minute to collect myself, but once I did, I just started laughing. That aggressive asshole had just done me the biggest favor. I was fine, but my car was fucked beyond all recognition, and this dude was going to have to pay for it. Life's a bitch most of the time, but every once in a while you get to come out on top. Exactly. I have 3 vehicles, a new car, motorcycle, and a beat-up, built like a tank old GMC truck I bought for $500. I have full insurance on the truck, and best believe it will not matter if you run into me. I was driving it last year when I was rear-ended by a girl texting in her newer Camry at a stoplight. Front of her vehicle crushed, and I had a small dent on the trailer hitch about 1/2 inch long. Bumper already had some dents, and honestly couldn't tell if she had added a new one or not. When I started doing relatively well, I still used my old crappy 1996 Kia strictly for dates and meeting new people just to gauge their reactions. Car was too old to sell at a reasonable price and still worked perfectly. I remember going to this date with a girl I liked a lot. When I picked her up in my old Kia, she laughed up in amusement and disgust. We didn't even finish the date. In fact, you can say the date didn't even start. My date called some friends as soon as we arrived at the restaurant, invented some excuse, and they picked her up. It's crazy how people can be like that. Back when I was single I had kind of the same thing going on. I make 95-105K a year, I work independently so it varies a bit year to year, but I also drive an insane amount and so I never care about having a nice car as I know I'll just run it into the ground. I went on a date with a really cool acting woman who was an anesthesiologist and the date went fantastic. She said what a great time she had and asked what I was up to that weekend and we made tenuous plans. Then we walked out to our cars. I had arrived a couple minutes after her so she hadn't seen my car, which were parked near each other. I was at the time driving a beat-up 7-year-old Kia Forte and as soon as she saw what I was driving her attitude changed. She literally never sent me another message after we left the parking lot. And yes, I know that an anesthesiologist makes a lot more than me, but I think she saw my car and immediately felt I was unworthy or something. Shit's whack. I feel this. I drove a super shitty car for a long time. My job requires me to go out to clients' homes, sometimes in very nice neighborhoods. I'd get stopped and asked why I was there, or people would just eye me suspiciously like what's this poor person doing here, ... My ex could never understand why I would come home complaining about rich assholes sometimes. I'm from the poor family. For my first car purchase, I went to a dealership and picked out a Honda Civic, and they proceeded to slap on something like a 10% finance rate on that sucker. I saw nothing wrong with it, I was young, I had no idea the typical finance rates, and I had brought my parents with me. Surely they would have raised a red flag if it had been a bad deal. No, I quickly realized later they had absolutely no financial literacy. One of the reasons we were poor, but certainly not the only one. Also, I could afford the monthly payments, and that's what really matters, right? I was about a year into it before I did some research, wised up, and paid that thing off ASAP. Drove it for nearly 10 years, ended up being a great car, but I can absolutely understand why people end up in these terrible underwater loans with rates that make your head spin. That was me. And I consider myself a smart person, but financial literacy is a whole separate thing from being smart. A lot of people have this idea that if you're rich, you're automatically smart, and if you make poor financial decisions, you're dumb. Well, both my husband and I make six figures now and I like pulling out this little nugget of info when people start cracking on people making bad decisions and they deserve to be miserable, etc. I was like, that was me once. Ironically, once I started making money, I had the ability to take the time to do research and make better decisions, because things weren't done at the last second emergency. LOL, sounds like me and my '09 Mustang. I got slapped with 17% interest because I didn't do research beforehand. Looking back on it now, even though I love the car, I would not have gotten it. This is a story my mom related to me. I wouldn't quite say that my dad is rich, he's a doctor, but compared to the family she grew up with, he is very wealthy. As a kid, my mom's idea of extravagance was buying gum at the movie theater. She had to pay her father back for this, and he counted every penny. When she started dating my dad, he would take her to the convenience store for a Coke, those styrofoam cups of soda you fill up from the fountain. After they married, they continued to do this every week. She was shocked. To her, the idea of getting a soda was a rare treat. For Dad, it was nothing. Not even pocket change. To this day, 30 years later, Mom gets a soda every week. Sometimes it's hard to see their love for each other, but these little rituals tell the story of their relationship. It's the other way around for me. My fiancé comes from a six-figure family. They have a beautiful home in the country on a very well-to-do road, 3 nice new cars, and they used to go on regular vacations when we were still in school. My single mom raised my sister and I alone in shitty apartments. The only way we afforded anything was through hand-me-downs and government assistance. We weren't dirt poor, but I never bought anything new until I graduated college and moved out on my own. Anyway, throughout my relationship with my fiancé we have had a series of conversations where she realized her family's flashy lifestyle wasn't typical and I realized how the other half lives. She was surprised to find I had never been camping in an RV or cabin, only tents. We didn't go out to eat except for very special occasions, and her family ate out every single weekend at nice restaurants in the area, which shocked me. For most gift-giving holidays, we got practical gifts and she got nice electronics. I could think of more, but you get the idea. Outside of little realizations, our financial backgrounds don't really affect us because her family is liquid garbage who has disowned her. Long story there, and I love my family, but they live far enough away that I don't see them a ton. The most we get out of it is I make jokes about her marrying down. Edit, fix some awful spelling errors. Edit 2, since so many people have asked, I'll add a TLDR regarding my fiancé's disownment. My fiancé is very different from her family. She's heavier set, her mom has struggled with an eating disorder her whole life and hates overweight people, and, worse, bisexual. To make matters worse, I'm a trans man, so her mom flipped her shit when we started dating. I don't think it was ever because my family is poor. She tried to scare my fiancé away from dating me, saying I'll tarnish her sterling reputation and that she doesn't want to be one of those girls. The actual disowning was the final straw in a series of incidents that had been escalating for the past 3-ish years. The short version is that it was summer, my fiancé, then girlfriend, was home from college, and I happened to have a week off from my summer camp gig. She was working at a grocery store at the time, and her stepfather woke her up 2 hours before she had to be to work, screaming at her that she was lazy, fat, disgusting, insert slurs against LGBT people here, just all the things he knew would really hurt her. He followed her around the house telling her she needed to get ready in 5 minutes so he could take her to work or she was walking. Mind you, he, my fiancé, and her mom all had their own cars at this point, and it's like 7 a.m. and her job is at least 10 miles away. This turned into him screaming at her to get her shit and get out, so she called me and begged me to get her. I couldn't drive, so my mom brought me. When I got there, she was in her work uniform in the driveway with a bundle of clothes in her arms. She was sobbing. Her stepfather had his hand raised but dropped it when we pulled in. I had to physically restrain my mom to keep her in the car because I knew if she left there would be a brawl. Meanwhile, her mom stood on the porch, saying and doing nothing while this unfolded. She got in the car and never went back. She lived with us while she and I finished college, and now we have our own apartment together. There's a lot more that went on, but I don't have the energy to type it all out because it was happening long before we met and is still in any way continuing. But it's been 3 years since then, and her mother still tries to tell her she's lying about what happened that day, but I know what I saw and I reassure her that she's not making up being kicked out. She doesn't say anything about it, but she talks in her sleep, and I know she still has nightmares about what happened. So yeah, they're awful people and she's better without them. Money can't buy a family that loves you, I guess. This is super embarrassing and will probably make you all hate me if it even gets any attention, but I come from a family just a bit higher than the top 1%. I was walking out of my ex's garage and I saw a lawnmower. I asked her why they owned their own lawnmower if they weren't in the landscaping business. That was the day I learned most people don't hire other people to mow their lawn. Edit, I was 20. No. We don't hate you. You are a product of your environment. It's a silly question for us poor folk, but if I had only ever saw someone else mowing lawns, I would probably also have the same question. No worries, dude. I once assumed that the man with the lawnmower in front of my boyfriend's house was a paid gardener. He was my boyfriend's father. Oops. I mean, I didn't realize until I left college, 21, that families lived in apartments. I had always assumed it was a temporary thing or for college students. He grew up in a very poor and seriously dirty house, like trash everywhere, dog poop scattered around even in the laundry piles. I asked him to do the dishes one day and he said why? They're just going to get dirty again. At his house they kept all the dishes dirty in the sink instead of clean in the cupboards and just wash one when they need it. His mom was a single mom to 3 kids and was in full-time school and full-time work, and none of the kids helped with any of the chores, and the mom never forced anyone to clean, so they never got done. Now they are all desensitized to dirty environments, which is really depressing. Their house is a nightmare, so sad. We are no longer together because of a lot of issues relating to the kind of environment he was raised in, and expected to raise our baby in. It's weird, I grew up broke, free school lunches and the like, and seeing my friends growing up, it seems to go one of two ways. We are broke, so take care of everything cause we can't afford to replace the carpet. Good thing I have two slave laborers kids, living in the house to do chores. My parents. We are broke, so who cares about anything, let's just let the house get disgusting even if one of the parents is not working. Friends' parents. She just ignored things and didn't plan. And X200E, car needs to be registered? Well, it has a service light on and can't pass inspection, so I'll just drive it unregistered. And X200E, student loans need to be paid? I don't have the money for it, so I won't open my mail from the servicer and ignore the problem. And X200E, need to fly somewhere for a big personal event? Can't really afford the plane ticket, so I'll push it off until the ticket is twice as expensive. And X200E, it drove me crazy as I'm the opposite. Luckily, I was able to change her worldview on these things and her credit score went up a few hundred points. She got back on track, and now can't believe her other family members who act similarly to how she did. Being poor is expensive, and, ironically, you're often penalized with fees or extra charges for not having enough money to pay for the initial expenses. The kid who sang Chocolate Rain said it best. Poverty charges interest. Delica's webpage. Can't pay for something small now, you'll pay extra for it later. I am actually on the other end of this. I grew up in a trailer park with my single mom and eventually met my ex who grew up in the upper crust of society. It was super obvious how differently we grew up because of it. I would tend to use things until they literally fell apart. I was wearing my last pair of shoes until the soles fell out from under them and I was walking on my socks. She would just throw things on the floor because the maid would take care of it. She just didn't give a shit about cleaning up after herself or about what things cost for what she got out of it. I've always been frugal to a fault because I never grew up with enough to afford to piss away. She basically got what she wanted when she wanted and never had to worry about whether or not she could afford something. When you have no reason to care, you don't. She had no concept of what it was like outside the financial bubble she lived in. It was like she was viewing the rest of society through binoculars. I've been on the other side of it. When I decided to go back to school, we had this long-ass argument that just showed me that this man had no idea what it was like to not have money. He wanted me to live in an RV to save money. First of all, I'd have to buy the thing. He said I could get a cheap one and fix it up, completely not seeing that the and then fix it up part would cost as much as getting a good quality used one. He didn't believe me when I told him it would cost more to park the RV anywhere near the school than to just rent a room. I finally made him call around to RV parks. The cheapest RV park within 15 miles from campus was over $1,200 a month. I pay $620 for the room I rented. Remember, his goal was for me to save money, so it had to be all-inclusive under $620 a month for 2 years. We then argued about me parking it on the side of the road and I was trying to explain to him that the bathroom needed to be cleaned and that if I was going to be cooking every meal in there, again, trying to save money, I needed electricity. So then he thinks I should put solar panels on it. Like that's free. It isn't just the RV. It was his complete lack of understanding of small incremental expenses adding up. My rented room, the one he thought was a waste of money, was less than $15,000 over the course of the 2 years I needed it to finish school and gave me access to a bathroom and a kitchen within 3 miles of campus. Somehow he thought an RV was going to save money over that. Please read the edit at the end of this post. Probably how often she shopped at Ross, grocery outlet, and other discount stores. I shopped at Whole Foods and bought my clothes at Macy's or online. For grocery shopping, we now go to grocery outlets mostly with a trip to Whole Foods every once in a while. It's significantly cheaper at grocery outlet but checking expiration dates is a must. Aside from my hobbies, I find I spend a lot less on groceries and clothes now, which in turn allows me to spend more on my hobbies. She never forced her lifestyle on me and I appreciated that. Edit, I'm not super rich. I feel like this post now looks like a failed attempt at a humble brag. I never meant to offend anyone. I work as a software developer in Silicon Valley, but there are people with 20 times my wealth here that would scoff at my salary. I also live in one of the most expensive cities in the country, but I was born here and I cannot leave. My intention was to show how my lifestyle differed with the lifestyle of my fiancé. That's it. Also, I never cared for expensive clothes, so thank you all for telling me Macy's is for poor people. I'm a watch guy and not a clothes guy. Don't get me wrong, I have some quality-ass department store professional clothes in my wardrobe, but I also have hella shit from Ross. Ross, Marshalls, TJ Maxx work great if you know how to select quality stuff. I now only buy my workout clothes from there cause I can always find pieces from a generic brand that are well stitched and made from good material for, like, $5. By contrast, the one thing I had from Lululemon cost well over $50 and fell apart after a year. Never again. Weird situation here. Had a lot of money and support from my grandmother who was well-to-do. When she passed, I didn't want to deal with the family as they challenged the will in court. Was more interested in seeing their true colors than fight them. Spent the rest of my money to finish college and on living expenses in a car. Dated this woman who I thought was not as well-to-do. Orphan, grew up in a rural area in manufactured housing. Worked in a service job. Well, I got a bad ticket, my attorney sucked and it turned into a failure to appear. She made it go away. Then my windshield broke and Subaru said they'd reimburse me, but I didn't have the $900 to pay up front. She covered it. Ended up moving in with her and marrying her, and it turns out she inherited a significant amount of cash and property, but still works and laughs like it isn't there. The best part, I work for a basketball team, and she turned out to be a donor and season ticket holder, and she had known who I was for 2 years before we met formally. I grew up very poor while my boyfriend is upper middle class, thank my amazing grandfather not retiring until he was 80 being the only reason we weren't homeless compared to the first time he and his siblings set foot in a public school was in college, which their parents pay for. We drove our car until the shop refused to release it because it was in such bad shape. They regularly buy brand new cars in cash. Not rich, but millionaires compared to my upbringing. Originally, I was the reckless spender and he was far more guarded. My mom has a lot of mental health issues and didn't teach me any adult skills, especially financially. It wasn't until I left to go to college that I started figuring stuff out. Opened a credit card to build credit, got a small amount saved up, but I still struggle with impulse buying, especially when my depression gets worse. He used to never spend money, but now he makes all the impulse buys while I worry about getting money saved. I think the big difference is he's still living at home while finishing school, and while he pays for all his education currently, and is getting out loan-free, his parents pay for everything else and the money they'd spend on his education is going into his already very healthy Roth IRA, so he has a lot of extra disposable income to spend on expensive hobbies. Meanwhile, I have my car payment, car insurance, rent, utilities, groceries, student loans, etc., and will have a few slim months coming up where I'll be squeaking by. I'm trying to save up for but am failing due to an unexpected surgery earlier this year eating at my income. What it boils down to is I'm trying very hard to get ahead financially and can't, while he's spending everything extra and is already light years ahead and gaining because he has a very large helping hand. Money frustrates me while he doesn't think twice. Retirement seems like a pipe dream, but he's thinking about an early retirement. It's all crazy talk to me. Not exactly what you're asking, but I dated a girl who had received a hefty inheritance from her grandparents and parents and remember eating some pre-packaged meal at her place and liking the food, so I asked where she got it and how much it was. She said Whole Foods and that she didn't ever look at prices. It blew my mind that someone could shop at Whole Foods, no less, and not even consider prices. She just grabbed what she liked and threw it in the cart. Both came from poor backgrounds. Hubby now earns 6 figures. I still buy my clothes from a charity shop because I cannot ever fathom why you'd spend £400 on shoes and bags for a season. You can buy designer clothes in a charity shop if you know what you're looking for. I think M&S and Waitrose are just overpriced when you can get a trolley full of fresh food and eat like kings at Aldi for £100. I don't do takeaway food. Funny story though, when we first got together I was making a spaghetti dinner and grabbed a bottle of red wine off his shelf to add to the sauce. I didn't know what £45 bottle of wine was, and still think it tasted pretty ordinary. And I drink a lot of wine. My ex was from a stupid rich family, international student, and would literally go out for dinner every day in central London. The first time I took him to Aldi to do our food shopping we got so much food and he couldn't believe how cheap it was. Aldi is the best. Why are you buying club sausage? What even is it? I don't know, but it's 40p for 6 slices. The sheer amount of trauma and violence they endured growing up in poverty. This one is sad and it's honestly shocking. So, content warning, fucked up shit. My spouse and all of their friends got beat as kids, sometimes even by non-family members like teachers. So were their parents. Also everyone seems to have a childhood molestation story. It happened at least once to every single one of the adults in the family I married into. 2 of my nephews have already had an event like that. Our friend's daughter as well. And it's simply because folks in poverty have no recourse. They're easy targets. The parents care just as much as any other parent, but they're so overworked that there is not enough supervision. Also, meth is a big problem in the community my spouse came from, and that makes it all much worse. Organized crime groups like to come into poverty-stricken neighborhoods and small towns, and they use them as pawns and foot soldiers. And the cops don't give a flying fuck. Nobody fucking protects the poor and it's seriously not okay. Small town America hides some of the most fucked up evil shit you can imagine. And people get trapped there their whole lives. I'm so glad my spouse made it out. I don't really come from a well-off family, divorced parents and whatnot. But we did always have clothes and food, and normally got brand-name clothes and some expensive things from our grandparents for presents. My girlfriend though that I've been living with for the last year came from a family of 5, all with different dads and no actually dad that stuck around. Bounced around foster care when she was really young until her grandparents took her in. But at times went without eating because there was no money, and continued to live this way as she moved out right after high school and could just barely afford what she needed. Fast forward to now, she's starting to come around to the idea that we can always buy groceries, and spend a decent amount on them if she wants. She was always super against spending any money on anything that wasn't needed, always worried about something going wrong and suddenly needing more than what we have saved up. It's been a trip trying to convince her that we're okay and we have the money that we need plus that little extra. Food was a privilege or luxury, not a given. And X200E, my wife and I do well enough together, not rich but comfortable. My parents are fairly well off and I grew up in a house with always stocked pantry and refrigerator. If I was hungry, I ate without question. And X200E, my wife grew up in relative poverty. If she was hungry, there was a strong likelihood that there was no food in the house and she would stay hungry. Trips to grandparents' homes to be fed were common. And X200E, her gratitude that her son will never know the despair of an empty refrigerator as a humbling reminder of our very different childhoods. Oddly, my wife's family and upbringing was much poorer than mine. And X200E, surprisingly, she is the one who has poor spending habits. I am the frugal one. I always weigh the inherent value quality of the purchase versus the cost. She never does. She doesn't think much ahead of the basic monthly paycheck cycle. She'll spend money on junk, I'll wait, and wait, then buy something really nice as opposed to some cheap pus that merely fills the gap in the moment. And X200E, it has been the cause of many an argument between us. It's not so surprising. When you are poor, the acquisition of small luxuries become more psychologically satisfying. A more well-off person knows they will be able to plan and achieve their goal. A poor person realizes that if they don't spend that windfall immediately, it will likely be frittered away on the necessities of life, and the chance for that jolt of happiness will be gone forever. It's not particularly logical, but it is a very powerful urge, akin to an addiction. Oh wow, I basically just posted this same thing above. I grew up very poor, and do okay now. It's still a hard pattern to break. This is me to a T, and now I finally understand it. I'm awful with money and have no savings and racked up a nasty credit card bill in addition to student loans, all because I have this urge for a right then and now kind of pleasure, as you said, akin to an addiction. Every paycheck I tell myself, okay, let's take it slow and stretch this, no binging, and by Monday I have like $100 left. Granted, I take care of my bills first, but there is no restraint once those are taken care of. Thanks for helping me realize this is an actual problem and not just me being irresponsible. The best thing to do is to treat your savings like another bill. Have it taken off your pay automatically and put somewhere that it's a bit harder for you to access. That way you need to consciously think about spending it. I suggest you read John Chee's pieces on poverty over a cracked. He explains very well how poor people are conditioned to buy the moment they have any money, because that money is a goner anyway. Cracked often gets derided as clickbait trash, and often not wrongly, but those articles are some of the most insightful writing I've read anywhere on the internet. I highly recommend a book called A Framework for Understanding Poverty by Ruby K. Payne. It won't fix your issue with your wife, but it will help you understand where she is coming from and how her upbringing influences her current behavior in ways that aren't obvious to you. Didn't marry her, for a variety of reasons, but I had a vacation planned once with my so but we ended up breaking up prior to going. I decided I wasn't going to cancel, and asked a few different friends if they would like to go with me. Ended up taking a girl I was mildly interested in, but lived across country that I had known for a few years but never met in person. Annex 200E. Anyway, we were making a trip down the coast of California with a variety of stops along the way. One of them was Monterey Bay Aquarium. So there we are sitting at the Oyster Bar, which has this amazing view of Monterey Bay, and I look over at her and she says, "I've never seen the ocean before," with the same tone of voice you might say I need to have a root canal. I realized a couple of things in that moment, just how poor she really was and how different our lives had been, how big a deal this little meaningless trip to me was to her, and how totally messed up she was emotionally. I later found out she had in fact never left her hometown, never been on an airplane until then, never been to a theme park of any kind. We spent a few days at Disneyland, and I just felt absolutely horrible for her. My family had periods of overabundance and extreme poverty, so I had experienced both ways of life, but it struck me that even though I knew what poverty was, I didn't know what only poverty was. I'd had bad times, sure, but I had also had really good times, really great memories. She did not. Everyone in her life had used her and thrown her away, and she was just broken. Annex 200E. I cared about her, but I realized I didn't really love her. I wanted to make her life better, but I knew that while we had a lot of fun, we were just two very different people with almost nothing in common and a totally different perspective on the world. She had serious emotional problems she needed to work through, and it wasn't something I could fix for her by throwing money around. We parted ways on good terms. I'm glad I got to give her an experience that I like to think gave her a reason to focus on herself and work through things, but I will never know because once she got back home she totally cut off contact with me. I heard through a friend that while she acted like she understood and felt the same, she in fact didn't and was devastated by it not working out between us. It still bothers me today that I couldn't help her more, and I don't know what happened to her. I've tried to find out with no success. It's like she dropped off the face of the planet. Annex 200E. Anyway, if she's reading this, I'd really love to just know that you are okay. I wasn't rich, but I had enough for a ranch house and car and a few other conveniences. My wife was really poor and came from a home where both parents were alcoholics. I had a decent job, so it was okay, and her past was her past and she never drank. Throughout the years she went to medical school while I worked as much as I can. Fast forward 11 years. During those 11 years she studied and worked a part-time job. She graduated and obtained a very good paying job. She was making more than me, which was awesome. The last 9 years I was dealing with health issues and had over 10 surgeries. I am disabled now and in a lot of pain. I cannot work. I am the one that gets about 15% of my original income from Social Security disability. So, now she is the one that makes the money and I do what I can. She has been the most wonderful and the most appreciative wife I could ever ask for. Our roles did a 180, but our marriage couldn't be better. I have surgery 11 and 12 coming up on my spine. Scary stuff, but a lot less scarier with her in my life. And I do show her my appreciation and affection every day. Update, thank you for the silver. I came from a family worth multi-millions. My wife came from a family who could barely eat and dealt with CPS at times. We fell in love in high school. We've been married for 12 years and love each other more each day. About 5 years into our relationship, I realized how weak I was in comparison to her strength. And realized that much of what I had growing up, while providing a net of safety, produced feelings and issues of anxiety. On the contrary, when we faced adversity in our earlier years, my wife was a solid rock. I don't mean this to sound insensitive, but at times, I am envious of what she experienced growing up is because it has made her an amazing human being full of strength and peace. Nothing phases her. Annex 200E, I was told by people outside of my immediate family, friends and others, how there would be challenges with our demographics being so vastly different. The only challenge I've found is on her end, having to deal with someone who had so much given to them growing up out of good intentions from their parents, and her being so gracious and strong in helping me overcome my weaknesses. We are not rich by any means currently. I came from comfortable post-war middle class, and I married into a scary broke family, and her boy money attitudes are whack. My attitudes towards money comes and goes, there are ways to get more of it, cash is handy to have around, you should have some kind of interest-bearing savings account, don't have a credit card that's got a higher limit than what you have saved, keep your credit lines mostly paid off, automate as much as you can, clip coupons and shop sales, if it's old and it works keep using it. Hoarding isn't always a bad thing, staying at a job with good benefits is better than bailing to an unknown job, a big chunk of land with a trailer on it is better than a condo in the city. Hobbies should either improve your life or make things you can use or sell. My spouse's attitudes towards money is an absolute necessity. If we don't have money we are going to starve. If we have money we should spend it before it evaporates. Coupons are for rich people who can waste time and space plotting stupid toothpaste purchases and storing extra toothpaste. Actual quote, you should know how much money you have at all times, are also a quote. Used cars are about to break. New cars are only good for about 5 years. Cash in the house will get you robbed. Tattoos are a good investment because they can't be stolen easily. Living in the countryside is stupid because there is no libraries or movie theaters or people. You should fantasize daily about how to get rich. Another quote, scratch-offs are a good hobby because you can fantasize about getting rich, are also a quote. The environments that created these attitudes could not have been more different. I spent a lot of time growing up around people who had lived through the Depression and World War II, and the hoarding was ever present and sometimes thrifty. We had a massed set of country crock leftover containers etc., and the attitudes about money were fairly relaxed. Everyone had at some point damn near starved. Eating household pets was a funny story to tell the grandkids. Everyone had gotten a good job after a war, they survived and sent their kids off to college with the wages from their good job or their retirement or their pension. There was a ton of unjustified classism. Why doesn't so-and-so down the road just get a good union job like I did? But they were all fairly comfortable middle-class homeowners in their own eyes. The fridge was full. The cars usually ran. Danger was something you had to drive quite a ways to get to. My spouse on the other hand bounced around from place to place, spent his childhood fleeing eviction, poverty, violence, the consequences of his parents' various addictions, personality disorders, PTSD and substance dependencies. There were long periods of food insecurity and scary events. There was some institutionalization. Prized possessions got broken in drunken fits of rage or abusive outbursts, stolen by junky neighbors, destroyed by angry playmates, or left in trash bags on the curb during another eviction. Credit cards were to be used to start over again and then defaulted on. Taxes went unpaid and unfiled for years. Jobs were objects of resentment. The spouse's mom luckily found a boyfriend at a bar who had a house in a nice suburb, so the spouse got to go to middle and high school in a quiet, fairly upscale school district. They lived after the inevitable breakup in the cheapest apartments in the school district with a different dude who had a job. The spouse started working for cash at 13, which is younger than the legal working age in this state, so that he could contribute to the rent and pay the electric bill, to keep the lights on. Working 80 hours a week, instead of doing homework, is better in the immediate sense than waking up in the silent stifling dark at noon, late for school with a week's worth of food gone bad in the fridge. Meanwhile I was blissfully bopping along flunking classes and drinking and expecting a free ride to college anyway. Now here we are many years later, and I am the overly practical one who is pulling the emergency brake every time that unemployed fancipant starts agitating for a major purchase. TLDR, the environment you grew up in teaches you what in your life you can depend on. Money is a tool like a lever, and if you don't have faith in the place you balance it, then all you get is anxiety instead of leverage. The concept of significantly poorer seems distorted in this thread. And X200E, after I was married, we visited my wife's village, and X200E, preserving chickens for all but the most formal occasions. Trucks come by the village asking who will sell dogs. Our family doesn't sell. Not using cash, instead use scales to barter, or exchange quantities watermelon, seeds, wheat. I participated in this. Invest in a farm vehicle, and it can also be the family car going to market. Don't own cars. Don't use electricity or water, dig a well, burn leftover farm things, corn husks, or sticks from trees that grow on commonly owned land etc. Use the patches of land next to common waterways for growing greens. Dump trash anywhere, no concept of garbage collection. Don't gamble in the winter season. Hand make all your clothing. Build your house by calling neighbors and use materials that are surplus from local government or otherwise civil construction projects. Send your kids to school to live away from home from 10 years old. The government will provide a car and meals. My wife grew up in this way. And X200E, her precious memories from childhood are during exams. Her mother traveled several hours to a city and purchased a fruit, I think she describes an orange, or mandarin orange, or some similar fruit, my wife heard about in school. Mom waited at the school gates, and gave it to her in hopes for the best of luck during exams. Not a video game console, or some vacation, luxury is getting to eat a fruit. And X200E, she was a tall girl, and ate more than the school gave. But her older sister, who now lives in the far north of the country, was there and would manage to get an extra wheat bun for her, and could eat it at night. In the cold season, there often wasn't enough materials for heating, I don't know if that is wood, gas, or coal heaters, to go around. They could sleep together. Today, my wife has moved at how well her sister cared for her. And X200E, this is not a long time ago. We are not old. This is still how many parts of the world operate. Knowing that our children will grow up in a different world is a complicated emotion. Not married. I'm still in my 20s, but somehow every guy I've ever dated is piss poor or comes from a family drowning in debt. The one thing they all had in common is they spent more than me on average monthly. I tally up my SOS expenses almost obsessively. It's gross, I know. I can't turn my brain off when it comes to numbers. My family is new money, so I grew up counting cents until HS, the habit stuck. Last guy I dated took me to meet his parents and was so embarrassed by their financial situation home he didn't let me stay for dessert. He started saying we may not be a good fit, but I really liked him, so, big mistake, thought I could sit him down and give some financial advice. Didn't set up a huge presentation or anything. Over coffee, pulled a napkin from the dispenser and started running numbers with him. At first, he seemed thankful and was very responsive. Then we tallied up the amount of money he wasted a year on just ridiculous and unnecessary expenses. Never seen a man look like that before. I felt like such a bitch. He paid for us and left. Saw him again a few days later when he came to say goodbye and grabbed some things out of my car. She was born poor, mom came into a large inheritance and blew it all immediately, and had a sibling and friends who destroyed or took her stuff all the time. I was born middle class that saved and spent modestly, but we lost everything when we were a couple years into upper class due to divorce and the recession. We were both homeless together for our first 5 months together. Now I'm becoming a rocket scientist and she's becoming an accountant. We're not even sure about having kids. After seeing so much shit, we kinda just want to secure a future for ourselves, retire early, and live our dreams, an opportunity that seemingly no one on earth gets.